300 people showed up to an empty lot in an American city on Saturday morning. They had no government permits, no federal funding, and no city council approval. By Sunday morning, there was a homeless shelter standing where dirt used to be, with beds, insulation, heating, and a line of people waiting to sleep somewhere safe for the first time in months. The city had nothing to do with it. This is happening right now across the country, and when you understand how they are pulling it off, you will never look at the homelessness crisis the same way. Because the numbers behind this crisis are staggering. In January 2024, the Department of Housing and Urban Development counted 771,480 people experiencing homelessness on a single night. That is the highest number ever recorded since the government started tracking this data back in 2007. It jumped 18% from the year before, the largest single-year increase in the history of the count. When you realize that this is just a one-night snapshot taken on one evening in January, the real number of Americans cycling through homelessness throughout any given year is dramatically higher. Behind that number are some trends that should keep every American up at night. Families with children saw a 39% spike in a single year. Nearly 150,000 children under the age of 18 had no permanent home. 150,000 kids in the richest country on earth did not know where they would sleep tonight. Chronic homelessness, meaning people with disabilities who have been unhoused for a year or longer, climbed to over 152,000 individuals, nearly double what it was at its lowest point in 2016. But those are just the national numbers. When you zoom into individual states, the picture gets even worse. California alone accounted for 187,000 people, roughly a quarter of the entire national total. New York followed with 158,000. Hawaii saw an 87% surge, largely driven by the Maui wildfire aftermath. Illinois jumped 116%. This is not just a big city, coastal state problem. Homelessness increased in 43 out of 50 states, from rural towns in Montana to suburban neighborhoods outside Chicago. Only 7 states and Puerto Rico actually saw their numbers go down. The demographics tell a story that should trouble everyone. About 60% of homeless Americans are men, but the number of women and families is climbing fast. Black Americans make up roughly 13% of the general population, but account for nearly 32% of people experiencing homelessness. People who experience homelessness have an average life expectancy of just 50 years, compared to 77 for the general American population. That is a 27-year gap in how long you get to live, determined in large part by whether or not you have 4 walls and a roof. So where is the government in all of this? That is where this story takes a turn. The federal response system added over 60,000 new shelter beds in 2024, which sounds like a lot until you realize that more than 600,000 new people enter homelessness for the first time every single year. That means for every bed they add, 10 more people need one. Permanent supportive housing capacity has grown significantly since 2007, more than doubling in some categories, but not nearly fast enough to keep pace with demand. In 2024, not a single state in the entire country had enough permanent housing for everyone experiencing homelessness within its borders. Not one. Then there is the speed problem. The bureaucratic machinery behind every new government-funded shelter, from zoning approvals to environmental reviews to competitive bidding on construction contracts, moves at a pace that would be comical if people were not literally dying while waiting for it. A typical affordable housing development for extremely low-income residents now trends above $200,000 per unit. That is before the years of planning, permitting, and legal challenges that many projects face before a single shovel hits the ground. Some communities have fought zoning battles for a decade just to get approval for a small cluster of transitional homes. Meanwhile, in the wake of a Supreme Court decision giving cities more authority to clear homeless encampments, Some local governments have chosen to criminalize homelessness rather than solve it, fining people for sleeping outside, confiscating their belongings, pushing them from one block to the next. That costs taxpayer money, fills up jails, and does absolutely nothing to put a roof over anyone's head. That is exactly why communities are taking matters into their own hands. What they are pulling off in a single day with nothing but volunteers and lumber sounds impossible until you see it happen. The idea behind a 24-hour shelter build starts weeks or sometimes months before anyone picks up a hammer. A small team of organizers, usually connected to a local nonprofit, a faith community, or an established organization like Habitat for Humanity, identifies a piece of donated or leased land. They source materials in advance. Prefabricated wall panels, insulated floor sections, roofing components, electrical conduits, and plumbing assemblies are pre-staged on pallets at the build site the night before. Then comes the volunteer coordination, and this is where it gets impressive. 300 volunteers sounds like a crowd, but when you break it into organized shifts of 75 to 100 people rotating every 6 hours, it becomes manageable. Each shift has a handful of licensed contractors and skilled tradespeople leading the work. Electricians, plumbers, carpenters, and general contractors volunteer their expertise and direct the unskilled helpers through every task. You do not need to know how to frame a wall. You just need to follow the person who does. By 6 a.m. on build day, the first shift arrives to a site that already has foundations poured or ground-level platforms in place. Coffee stations and breakfast tables are set up along the perimeter. Volunteer check-in happens at a central tent where everyone gets a safety briefing, a hard hat, and a team assignment. Within the first 3 hours, wall panels are going up. Framing teams work in parallel across multiple structures, each one led by a contractor calling out measurements while a crew of first-time volunteers hold studs in place and drive screws. By lunchtime, you can already see the outlines of buildings that did not exist that morning. People who had never held a circular saw before breakfast are suddenly cutting trim boards with confidence, and the energy on the site is almost electric. The second shift takes over mid-afternoon, focused on roofing, exterior sheathing, and starting the interior rough-ins. Electricians begin wiring outlet boxes and running conduit. Plumbers connect water lines and test pressure. Insulation teams stuff fiberglass bats into wall cavities while the structure is still open, because once the drywall goes up, you cannot go back easily. The overnight crew handles the finish work, and these tend to be the most experienced volunteers. Drywall goes up, interior paint gets rolled on, doors get hung, and heating systems get connected and tested. Mattresses and bedding get carried in by a final team of volunteers who are sometimes the very people from the community who will be managing the shelter after it opens. By the time the sun comes up the next morning, what was an empty lot 24 hours ago now has walls, a roof, running water, electricity, and enough beds to shelter dozens of people who were sleeping under bridges the night before. The first organization to really prove this model at scale was Habitat for Humanity with their Home Builders Blitz program. It started back in 2002 in Wake County, North Carolina, when a local home builder named Tom Gibson partnered with Habitat to build 12 homes in 5 days. That effort grew into a national program. By 2018, Blitz build events had taken place in 31 states, constructing or repairing 253 homes in a single year. Over the life of the program, more than 2,000 homes have been built through these rapid community efforts. The tiny home village movement has exploded alongside these builds. In Los Angeles alone, the city partnered with Hope of the Valley Rescue Mission to open multiple tiny home villages, each consisting of 40 to 76 individual units. These are 64 square foot structures with 2 beds, heat, air conditioning, a small desk, and a front door. Across all their sites, they provide hundreds of beds for people coming directly off the streets. In Seattle, The Low Income Housing Institute became one of the largest providers of tiny house village shelters in the country, partnering with churches, trade unions, and city officials to build transitional communities across the Puget Sound region. Sound Foundations, NW, a volunteer-driven nonprofit in the same area, has built hundreds of transitional tiny homes using an assembly line system at their facility called the Hope Factory. Seattle's mayor visited the operation and told them their transitional tiny homes were, in his words, the first best solution to homelessness. In Springfield, Missouri, a faith-based community called Eden Village built a tiny home model specifically for the chronically homeless, people with physical or mental disabilities who have been on the streets for a year or more. Their village provides permanent housing with on-site support, and the model is now being replicated across the country. What all of these projects have in common is that they were driven by ordinary people who got tired of waiting. Pastors, retired contractors, stay-at-home parents, military veterans, college students, retirees. People who looked at the crisis in their community and decided that doing something imperfect right now was better than waiting for something perfect that might never come. In many cases, the people leading these builds had never organized anything larger than a church bake sale before they decided to take on construction projects. But they learned, they called contractors, read building codes, held community meetings, knocked on doors, and convinced skeptical neighbors that this could work. It is worth mentioning that the volunteers who show up for these builds are not all young and fit. At the Spokane Habitat Blitz build, one of the most dedicated volunteers was a retired geologist in his 70s who had been showing up every single year for 24 years straight. He described himself as a finger beater alongside real skilled carpenters, but he kept coming back because the work mattered. Teenagers from trade programs worked alongside grandmothers from church groups. Construction company CEOS worked alongside people who had never held a power drill. That is what a 300-person build looks like in real life. Not a polished production, but a messy, beautiful proof of concept that regular Americans will actually build something with their hands if you just give them the chance. The reason urgency matters so much becomes brutally clear when winter arrives. Roughly 700 Americans experiencing homelessness die from hypothermia every single year, according to the National Coalition for the Homeless. Nationwide, the problem is getting worse, not better. In 2022, the United States recorded approximately 3,500 hypothermia deaths during a series of devastating winter storms. The CDC has documented a 35% increase in annual hypothermia deaths over the past decade, and the link to rising homelessness is direct. When you have 274,000 people sleeping unsheltered on any given night, and temperatures drop below freezing, the math is horrifying. An unheated space can fall below 50 degrees in just a few hours. Wet clothing accelerates heat loss. For older adults who are the fastest growing segment of the homeless population, the body simply cannot regulate temperature the way it used to. One thing worth mentioning, especially for anyone who does outreach work or lives in an area with harsh winters, a lot of the volunteers I have talked to who work these community builds keep thermal bivvies in their vehicles, not the cheap foil sheets that tear in the wind, actual emergency sleeping bags, like the ones from TerraShell, that reflect your body heat back and create a warm pocket around you without batteries or fuel. They pack down smaller than a soda can. When you find someone sleeping outside in freezing conditions and there is no shelter bed available that night, something that reflects 90% of their body heat can be the difference between making it to morning and not. Works the same way if your car breaks down in a storm or the power goes out at home. Link in the description. But the obstacles facing these volunteer builders go beyond the weather. The biggest barrier these volunteer builders face is zoning. In many American cities, local zoning codes make it nearly impossible to build affordable micro-housing or shelter facilities in residential areas. Neighbors file objections. City councils delay votes, Environmental impact studies stretch out for months. In some cases, volunteer groups have had their projects held up in court by business associations worried about property values, even when the community overwhelmingly supported the project. In Olympia, Washington, a tiny home village called Quixote Village started as a protest by homeless people in a city-owned parking lot back in 2007. It took years of legal fights, fundraising, and relentless volunteer organizing before the project finally broke ground. When it did, hundreds of church volunteers who had staffed the original camp showed up to help build. Today, Quixote Village houses 29 disabled adults who were previously chronically homeless. In Austin, Texas, a nonprofit called Mobile Loaves and Fishes built Community First Village, a 51-acre master-planned community providing permanent housing for people coming out of chronic homelessness. It includes micro-cottages, tiny homes, community gardens, a health clinic, and an entrepreneurship hub where residents can earn income. It is often cited as one of the most successful models in the country, and similar developments are being planned in cities from Arkansas to North Carolina. In Newfield, New York, just outside Ithaca, a project called Second Wind Cottages rallied more than 125 volunteers on a single Saturday to build 6 homes for formerly homeless men. Each cottage cost roughly $10,000, a fraction of what traditional affordable housing development runs. They raised nearly $100,000 in just 100 days through community donations. In Minneapolis, a warehouse was converted into Avivo Village, an indoor community of 100 private tiny dwellings serving unsheltered individuals. Since opening in December 2020, it has served over 850 people, and 343 of them have successfully transitioned into permanent housing. What these projects prove is that the building part is actually the easy part. Getting 300 people together for 24 hours and putting up structures is something Americans have been doing since barn raisings on the frontier. The hard part is everything that comes after. Who manages the facility? Who funds ongoing operations? Who provides the case managers, the mental health counselors, the job training programs that help residents transition out of homelessness? Shelter is not the same as housing. A home includes community, stability, support, and dignity. That takes sustained commitment, not just a single weekend of sweat. The best programs understand this. Eden Village does not just hand someone a tiny home and walk away. Residents pay $300 a month in rent, have access to support services, and live in a real community where neighbors check on each other. Hope of the Valley provides on-site meals, showers, case management, housing navigation, mental health support, and job placement. Avivo Village uses a housing-first model focused on getting people into permanent housing as quickly as possible. But even with all of this momentum, the gap between what communities are building and what the crisis demands is still massive. The underlying drivers, rising rents, stagnant wages, inadequate mental health services, and an aging housing stock are not going away anytime soon. So what can one person actually do? The answer depends on what you have to give. If you have time, organizations like Habitat for Humanity, your local Continuum of Care agency, and dozens of faith-based nonprofits are actively looking for volunteers every week, not just for builds, but for meal service, donation sorting, mentoring, and administrative work. You do not need construction experience, you just need to show up. If you have money, even small donations make a meaningful difference. $10,000 built an entire cottage in Newfield, New York. The cost of a family dinner out could buy blankets, hygiene kits, or emergency supplies for someone sleeping outside tonight. If you have skills, whether you are a retired plumber, an electrician, a carpenter, a nurse, a social worker, or a teacher, those skills are desperately needed. Many of the most successful community builds succeed specifically because skilled tradespeople donated their weekends. Even if you have nothing to give right now, but your awareness, that matters too. Talk about this with your family. Share what is happening with your community, because the single biggest barrier to solving this crisis is the belief that somebody else will handle it. And as 771,000 Americans sleeping without shelter tonight can tell you, nobody else is coming. The communities that are building shelters in 24 hours have figured out something that the rest of the country is still learning. You do not need permission to help your neighbor. You do not need a government contract or a city council resolution. You need a piece of land, a pile of lumber, and 300 people who decided that waiting was no longer an option. The shelters they build may not be permanent. The tiny homes may only be 64 square feet. The budgets may be held together with bake sales and church fundraisers. But for the person who slept outside last night in the cold, those four walls and that door that locks from the inside, that is everything. That is the difference between surviving and slowly dying in public while everyone pretends not to notice. Every single one of those 300 volunteers went home that Sunday morning, tired, sore, and covered in sawdust. Every single one of them will tell you the same thing. It was the best day of work they have ever done. If you want to find a community build near you, I put links to every organization mentioned in this video in the description. Next week, I am covering the tiny home village movement that is spreading across the country faster than any government program. Subscribe so you do not miss it.